Hi, I'm Rachel, and welcome back to Auxhart Gardening. Today I'm doing my spring garden review. I'm talking about all the things I did that did work and all the things that didn't work that I'm gonna change. If you're new here, welcome. I'm gardening here in upstate South Carolina. It's zone 7B. I have my backyard garden as well as a raised bed or two that were out behind the fence when I moved into this place. This is technically an apartment slash condo, and I'm just making use of the space that I have. So let's get into it. First thing I want to talk about is my radishes. So I planted this year black Spanish radishes, and they're an extra long day variety, so most radishes take not that long, something in the like 25 to 30 day range. They're really good crop for new gardeners because they do have that return so fast. However, I was like, I want black radishes because that's cool, I guess. But they take 55 days, so it says on the seed packet. And my season in the spring, it just was not long enough to support that. So what happened was my radishes bolted early. They went to flower, started making seeds, and at first I was really disappointed in that because this is like one of the first things that I expected to harvest from my spring garden, and I realized very quickly that I was not going to get any harvest at all. However, there are a few positive things that happened despite this. The first thing is that because they bolted early, they were the first flowers in the garden, and that actually ended up attracting a lot of good pollinators. There's this big signal to all of them that was like, hey, there's gonna be a lot of flowers here. And I feel like some pollinators that might have overlooked that garden got attracted there and stuck around, and that's probably been good for that garden area as a whole. The second thing that happened was I read that letting brassicas, such as like your radishes, go to seed can actually deter a lot of pests. Now, I'm not 100% sure about this, but what I can tell you is that the peppers that I have here in the back, they got eaten up. But the peppers out in the back bed by the radishes, they were not touched. So, maybe it's just a different environment being inside the fence versus outside the fence. But given what I've read, I think that letting them go to seed actually offered a fair bit of pest protection for them. The third thing is that I was actually able to save the seeds from the radishes. They did go to seed, and so I let them go through that whole cycle, and I was able to save some seeds. And so now I have some that I can use to try again with these in the fall, when I think they'll have a much longer time period to be able to come to maturity. Alright, so in that same vein, let's talk about turnips. So my turnips actually did really well. I did purple top, white globe turnips, and basically I got some great turnips out of it. They did not start bolting until very late in the season. They had plenty of time. However, I definitely should have thinned them more. They were packed pretty tightly together, and I was very overambitious as to how much that would affect the size and the growing of them. So I think coming up when I try this again in the fall, I'm either going to space them out more or thin them out more, or I'm thinking about trying multi-sowing. This is a method that Charles Dowding does, if you've ever seen his YouTube videos, and I've never tried it. I'm very curious. I'd like to see if I can make that work for me. Alright, let's talk about the kale. So I had planted two varieties of kale in my spring garden, scarlet kale and blue dwarf kale. It's not actually blue, it's a green curly kale. And both of those I'd planted with the intention of using them for baby greens in salads, and that worked perfectly. I was able to pull the leaves off when they were really young, stick them in my salads and my smoothies. My kale is actually still producing right now. Since it's hot, the leaves aren't as sweet, but they're definitely fine to go ahead and put in smoothies. So that is doing really well. I actually had thought that they would go to seed by now, but they haven't. So I guess we'll just keep watching that one. Alright, the next thing I want to talk about is the carrots. So I planted two varieties of carrot. I planted the Auxhart carrot, which you may recognize from my logo, and the black nebula carrot, which is a very, very dark purple carrot. And so both of those are cold weather varieties like most carrots are. So I planted them pretty early on in the season, and they kind of had a slow start, probably because it was pretty cold and things grow slower when it's cold. But it ended up taking them so long to come to maturity that I ended up having to pull them kind of early in terms of size so that they wouldn't get bitter. I am not sure how much longer I actually had before they would have gone bitter. However, some of my black nebula carrots were starting to go to seed, so I figured, yeah, it's about time to pull them. Definitely, I'm going to try this again in the fall. I think that, again, the spring season here it's just too up and down in terms of the temperature swings, and then things get hot really early on. So I think probably a lot of these cool weather crops are going to do way better in the fall. And this past year I was actually able to overwinter some carrots. They grew really slowly, but they grew throughout the whole winter, and somewhere I think in March I was able to pull them out, and they were great. They hadn't gone bitter or anything. So we're going to be trying that again in the fall. Alright, the next thing I need to talk about is onions. So I started onions from seed in the fall and then transplanted those out into the garden in early winter, I guess. And my onions were very small. They grew, they bulbed up, but they were very small. And so I'm still in the process of figuring out why that is, but I have a few theories. The first thing to note is that it is not a long day versus short day onion problem. If you don't know, there are 2 to 3 types of onions. Some people call a midday onion, but there's basically long day and short day onions. And the difference is that a long day onion will only start bulbing up when the day length is above a certain number. I think it's like above 12 or 14-hour days, something like that. And then short day onions will start bulbing at a shorter day length. So if you live up north, you'll want to grow the long day onions. And if you're living further south, where there's not as much variation in the day length, then you'll want to grow short day onions. And if you're in the south trying to grow long day onions, then you're probably not going to get any onion bulbs because your days aren't going to get long enough. However, this was not my problem. I thought about this beforehand. I had done my research. I got my short day onions, and I still had a problem getting them to bulb up. I think maybe I planted them a little too late in the fall, so they weren't big enough when I transplanted them into the raised bed. And the second theory I have that is maybe a little more sad is that growing onions from seed in my zone, in my area of the state, is just not really that doable. There are several charts online that you can usually find for your area where they've put together just the best times to plant certain things based on where you live. And for my area, the state is divided into 3 parts. There's like the pointy end, the middle, and then the coastal side. And the 2 closer to the coast, those zones, they had days for planting seeds of onions. And then in my zone, it was like, nope, NA, not available. And I was like, oh no, like maybe it's not really that possible to grow onions from seed in my area. However, I am close enough to the dividing line between those 2 zones that I'm still gonna try again. So stay tuned for my onion escapades this fall. Something I did learn about onions though is, so halfway through their growing season, I tried to transplant them. I had them all planted in one area, and I wanted to start interplanting in that area, and I had some spare space in a different bed. So I moved some of my onions over to that spare bed, and while they survived and still bulbed up, they were much smaller than the ones that I didn't move. So I definitely don't recommend trying to transplant your onions in the spring at all. In a similar vein, I want to talk about the garlic that I planted. So I did not end up doing as much research on my garlic, and I ended up planting a lot of hardneck garlic. And anybody who knows what they're talking about will tell you, yeah, you should not plant hardneck garlic in the south, because hardneck garlic is requiring a lot more cold time to kind of set it up to be ready to bulb in the spring, whereas softneck garlic doesn't need as much time below freezing. So since our winters here are so mild, I think I actually counted there were like 3 or 4 days that it was substantially below freezing all winter at night. So definitely the hardneck garlic that I planted did not get the cold that it needed. Now, I still did get some bulbs from my garlic. It was not a total loss, but most of them were really quite small. And so this coming year, I'm definitely going to make sure I'm planting softneck garlic. All right, and the last thing to talk about is interplanting. This is the first time this spring that I really tried interplanting, and it was actually at the suggestion of some of you who were watching my videos as I went through. It was mainly in terms of the onions and the radishes that I had. At the time, I had no idea how long that was supposed to take, and when I was originally making my garden plan, I thought, yeah, sure, these things will be out of the garden by the time it's time to transplant in my tomatoes and peppers. And that was definitely not the case. So instead what I did was I interplanted. I put my little seedlings in that bed where they were supposed to go, in between all of that other stuff. And that actually went really well. I would probably do that again next year, and I'm probably going to try and do some version of that as I'm moving into the fall garden. Haven't planned that out yet, but we will see how that goes. I do recommend it. It was a little crowded, but I think that that's mostly because I let way too many of my radishes go to seed. If you saw the garden during that time, there was a literal jungle of radish pods everywhere, and that definitely shaded out some of the seedlings that they were near. You can see the difference in the plants between the ones that had all of the sun and the ones that were kind of shaded. But now that they're out, all those plants are recovering, and I think they're still going to do pretty well and produce for me this year. So I don't think ultimately that it was that much of a problem. And again, like I said, because the radishes were going to seed, I think that that really helped protect the peppers and tomatoes that I put in from some of the pests that they might have otherwise encountered during that time. Alrighty, well that is the end of my list for you today. I hope you learned something. I hope I was able to help you in some way through my either failures or successes in the midst of me trying all of these things out. Thank you so much for watching, and until next time, I wish you happy gardening.